Hey, Tom Burton here, author of The Revenue Zone, and welcome to our book overview session number 1. Today we're going to dig into the first 3 chapters of the book, which really go into the why behind the revenue zone and why it is a problem or a challenge that needs to be addressed in most B2B businesses. So let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, so here we are in the book, and we're going to start with the first 3 chapters, the introduction, chapter 1 and chapter 2, which, as I mentioned, discusses the why behind the revenue zone concepts. Let's go right to the introduction. And in the introduction, I introduce a little bit about my background, a bit of my career and what I've done, but more importantly, I introduce some really key facts that came from Gartner. And this is related to the way that B2B buyers are looking to buy in this day and age. And I won't go into all the detail here, but the bottom line is that more and more people are wanting to be in control of their own buyer journey, and many people don't want to have a salesperson involved in that experience at all. So this is really creating a very interesting situation and some very interesting challenges that we need to deal with as B2B sales and marketing professionals. I also introduced our new online free resource center that's available at therevenuezone.com/resources. And there are lots of good resources and tools in here as you work through the book, and there are going to be more and more resources added all the time. Okay, so that completes the introduction, and now we'll move to chapter 1. Now in chapter 1, I kind of drill in much more detail as to what's going on in what I'm calling the shifting business landscape. As I mentioned earlier, buyers want to be in control of their journey, but there's other things going on as well. And the things that are going on have really created the perfect storm, as I'll talk about here in just a minute. I also introduced for the first time what I mean by the revenue zone. And the revenue zone is a place in the buyer's journey where the prospect is seriously considering spending money on your products or services and doing business with your business. So as I go into it, doesn't mean there's no other competition. It just means the prospect is seriously considering spending money with you. And we go into that in more detail and what that really means. And as you see in this diagram here, in order for somebody to be in that revenue zone, they have to have a certain level of demand for your product or service, and they have to have a certain level of trust in your business. And the way that you get into that revenue zone, and this is a system that we will be getting into throughout the book, is what we call the yellow brick road. Then we talk more about who this book is for, what can be expected what you can expect to learn or discover through going through this book here, what's included. And then again, as I mentioned, we'll talk a bit about what I consider to be the perfect disruptive storm. And it's come together really through 3 macro level events that have been taking place over the last few years. The first of those is being virtual business. The second of those being really changes in privacy. And then third is this shift in the buyer journey. So the chapter ends with a summary. There's also some really good discussion questions that you can go over with your team. Chapter 2 goes into how you actually weather this disruptive storm. And I go into 3 rules for each of those 3 areas. How do you deal with virtual business? How do you deal with the whole privacy paradigm rule and issues? And how do you deal with the new buying behaviors that B2B buyers want to use? So we have 3 specific rules that deal with these 3 situations that we have. And then we talk also a bit about the mindset shift that's required to go from the old school philosophy of sales and marketing into more of this revenue zone mindset that addresses those 3 issues and 3 rules I just introduced. We then go through an example in a B2C environment about buying a car, which most of us have lived through, and examples of what would be a revenue zone experience versus a more old school experience. And then we compare that again with how that would work in B2B. And we lastly end up with chapter summary, and again, a summary of the rules and some discussion questions you can apply in your business. So as you complete chapter 2, you have between the introduction, chapter 1 and chapter 2, you'll have a good solid basis of the why behind the revenue zone. So that as you move into chapter 3, and we talk about the revenue zone matrix, you understand what you're trying to accomplish and the importance of accomplishing this in your business. Okay, so that was a quick overview of the first 3 chapters of the revenue zone book and the why behind the revenue zone concepts and the problems that it solves. In our next session, we'll drill into chapter 3, where we're going to introduce what we call the revenue zone matrix, which is a modern alternative to the traditional sales funnel. Okay, see you then.